flash of light on his face was what got me. David and I were sitting at our favorite Italian restaurant in Atlanta, celebrating what I thought was our 12th year of blissful marriage. He was talking about a new client, but his eyes kept darting down. Then, he briefly set his phone on the marble table to sip his expensive Malbec. The screen lock flashed bright with a notification I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't a work email, wasn't a generic alert. It was a text, message, visible even upside down. I miss you. See you tomorrow, babe. It was signed by Mark, colleague. In that single second, the warm, familiar air of the restaurant turned icy. There are certain moments in life, a heartbeat skipping, the sound of the world tuning out, when you realize your entire history is merely a preface to a catastrophe you are about to live through. I know what many of you might be thinking right now. Why didn't I throw the wine? Why didn't I scream? We will absolutely get to that, I promise. But right now, I need to know you are with me. If you're listening to this story from your car, your kitchen, or late at night under the covers, please take a moment. Drop your city and the time in the comments. It helps me feel connected to you all, knowing we are sharing this vulnerability across the miles. My name is Sarah. For 12 years, I had built the life that everyone envied. We lived in a stunning home in Buckhead. I ran a successful interior design firm, and David was a respected financial analyst. He was my anchor, my confidant, the man who remembered every single anniversary, every tiny preference. I didn't just love David, I trusted him completely. We had the kind of marriage where friends would joke that we were boring because we were so stable. That stability, that unwavering confidence in him, was my greatest weakness. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to my channel. We're a community dedicated to sharing the raw, honest stories of resilience and renewal after betrayal. If you believe that strength comes only after the storm, hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like. Your support means the world, and it helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Before that flash of light in the restaurant, the foundation of our life felt solid concrete. We had our routines: Sunday hikes, Tuesday night movie, dates, Friday takeout on the porch. David was meticulous about our home life. He was the one who insisted on planning our annual trips to the coast. That level of predictability was my shield. I was so secure in our shared bubble that I mistook comfort for permanence. I genuinely believed that our commitment was bulletproof, and that kind of blind faith makes the fall so much steeper. But if I am being truly honest with myself now, looking back through the crystal clear lens of heartbreak, the signals were there. They started subtly, like tiny tremors before an earthquake. The frequent late nights at the office became the new normal. He used to text me constantly throughout the day. That dropped off entirely, replaced by vague promises of calling me later. Then there was the change with his phone. David used to leave it open on the nightstand, face up, always unlocked. Suddenly, every time it was put down, it was face down, even when charging. If a text came through while we were watching TV, he'd jump, physically reaching for it with a sudden, nervous energy that he would quickly try to mask with a forced cough or an unnecessary trip to the kitchen. I would ask him about the tension, and he would always explain it away as intense pressure from a massive deal closing, or perhaps stress from his new project manager, whom he referred to only as Mark. He complained endlessly about this Mark, how demanding he was, how aggressive his deadlines were. And I, the trusting, foolish wife, swallowed every single neatly packaged excuse, offering massages and making sure his favorite dinner was ready when he finally dragged himself home. I convinced myself that the distance I felt was simply the unavoidable toll of success. The message at the restaurant, however, changed the game. It wasn't Mark, colleague, anymore. It was babe. And the timing was impossible to ignore. I didn't confront him then. My survival instinct kicked in, cold and sharp. Instead of erupting, I smiled, reached across the table, and placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. He looked startled, then relieved. He had no idea the war that had just started inside my mind. I told him I wasn't feeling well. A terrible migraine was coming on, and that we needed to leave immediately. I needed to get home, not to rest, but because I suddenly remembered a crucial document I had left on my desk earlier that day. A document I absolutely needed for an early morning meeting that couldn't wait. The lie slipped out smoothly, rehearsed and ready. He frowned, concerned for my headache, and insisted on driving me straight back to the house. Little did he know, he was driving me right into the perfect trap. He pulled the Lexus into the sweeping driveway of our beautiful Dallas home. "Are you sure you're okay, honey?" "You look pale," Mark said, genuinely worried about the migraine I had faked. His concern was a bitter acid in my throat. I just needed to get inside. I needed to confirm what I already knew was waiting. "I'll be fine once I get that document," I muttered, already grabbing my purse. But as I opened the car door, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Beside Mark's work truck, parked awkwardly close to the rose bushes, was a smaller silver sedan. Brenda's car. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from a fake headache, but from the sudden, chilling confirmation that my carefully constructed world was about to explode. Mark noticed the car too. "Oh, is Brenda here? That's odd. She usually texts." He sounded mildly annoyed, thinking she was just borrowing sugar or dropping off a casserole. That casual ignorance, the ease with which he carried his lie, made me feel dangerously calm. "Maybe she just wanted to chat," I said, my voice unnervingly level. "I'll just grab my file and we can leave again." I rushed past him, not giving him time to walk to the front door with me. The silence that greeted me when I stepped inside was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a secret being protected. The house, usually vibrant with the echoes of our life, felt inert, like a museum exhibit paused mid-display. The air conditioning was humming, but something else was present. A chemical signature that shouldn't have been there. It was Brenda's cheap, overtly sweet jasmine perfume. It wasn't subtle. It clung to the foyer like a toxic warning sign. I followed the scent, my footsteps on the polished mahogany staircase making no sound at all. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to preserve the illusion. But the pragmatic strategist inside me demanded proof. Irrefutable proof. I reached the landing. The door to our master bedroom, the sanctuary we had designed together, was slightly ajar. Just enough to see a yae sliver of the expensive rug and the corner of the king-sized bed. My heart didn't pound. It froze. It turned into a block of ice pressing against my ribs. I paused, taking a deep, ragged breath that pulled the jasmine scent deeper into my lungs, burning them. This was the point of no return. I raised my phone, unlocking the camera, my fingers strangely steady. I pushed the door open, slowly, soundlessly, just enough to frame the scene. And there they were, not in some frantic, movie-like struggle, but comfortably, disgracefully tangled in the center of our white duvet. Brenda's blonde hair was splayed across the pillows I had embroidered. Mark's head was thrown back, and the lazy, satisfied look on his face. That was what truly broke the machinery inside me. He wasn't just having sex. He was enjoying a casual domestic afternoon tryst with the woman who lived 3 doors down. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was an insult to the intimacy we shared, treating our bedroom like a cheap motel room. I stood in the doorway, a ghost in my own home, and for a terrifying second they didn't even notice me. When Mark finally lifted his head and saw my reflection in the dresser mirror, his eyes went wide with pure, paralyzing terror. Brenda followed his gaze, her jaw dropping, a silent scream caught in her throat. I didn't utter a word. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream, cry, or throw anything. That level of theatrical reaction belonged to the woman I used to be, the naive wife. The woman standing there now was cold, surgical, and utterly detached. My thumb pressed the record button. The small red timer started counting, documenting the wreckage. "Don't move," I finally said, the sound barely a whisper but carrying the weight of granite. Mark scrambled, pulling the sheets up, stammering an incoherent plea. "Elizabeth, wait, Quiet," I commanded, stepping fully into the room, holding the phone steady, capturing the shame, the panic, the ugly reality. "I am not waiting. You have 5 minutes to get dressed. Both of you." I didn't address Brenda, treating her as the insignificant object she was. I kept the camera rolling as I walked over to the nightstand, where I grabbed Mark's wallet and, most importantly, the key to the front door and the garage door opener. I calmly walked out of the room, slamming the heavy oak door shut. The sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. Then, with a precision that comes only from absolute shock, I turned the lock on the master bedroom door from the outside. They were trapped. Not forever, but long enough for me to secure the perimeter. My next move was swift and necessary. I walked downstairs, past the living room where we had just celebrated our anniversary, and pulled out my other phone, the one with the specialized contacts. I didn't call the police. I didn't call, my mother. I called Richard. Richard, Brenda's devoted, unsuspecting husband, who had just helped Mark fix the sprinkler system last week. It was a calculated risk, but one that maximized the humiliation and minimized their ability to coordinate their lies. "Richard," I began, my voice clear, steady, and dangerously devoid of emotion. "I apologize for calling you during your workday in Houston, but I need you to come home to Dallas right now. Do not stop for anything. Do not call Brenda. Just drive. Something truly catastrophic has happened, and it involves your wife and my husband. I have definitive proof, and I promise you, you will want to see it with your own eyes." I gave him no room for questions, no comfort, just the sharp, clean edge of truth. The trap was set. Now I just waited for the final audience to arrive. The game had begun. I still remember the throbbing pressure behind my eyes that afternoon. It wasn't the usual stress headache. It was a sudden, debilitating migraine that felt like a drill bit working its way into my skull. It was late Tuesday, normally the busiest day at the gallery, but there was no way I could focus on closing the deal with the New York collectors. I called my assistant, mumbled something about a stomach virus, and decided to cut my losses and drive the 15 minutes back to our quiet, perfectly manicured home in Dallas. That sudden, involuntary pain saved me, because it pulled me out of the constructed reality I lived in and forced me to confront the real one. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar click of the automatic gate grating against my nerves. The sight of our home, usually a beacon of warmth, seemed oddly muted. I parked in the garage, noting automatically that David's car was there. Strange, I thought. He usually worked late on Tuesdays setting up his quarterly reports. But the really unsettling thing wasn't his vehicle. It was the second car, parked just slightly too close to the wall, almost hidden. Brenda's SUV. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach, replacing the ache of the migraine. I told myself it was fine, perfectly normal. Brenda, my closest friend, our neighbor, might have dropped by for a quick coffee or to pick up some documents she lent David. Maybe she saw his car and just stopped. But the silence in the house was too deep. Usually, there was the low hum of the washing machine, the distant sound of the television or the dog barking. Nothing. Just an oppressive, thick quiet. I opened the front door with my key, stepping into the cool air of the foyer. The first thing that hit me wasn't the silence, but the scent. It was a dizzying mixture of David's usual cedar cologne and something sweet, cheap, and floral. Brenda's signature perfume, the kind that clings to fabric and lingers in the air like a poorly kept secret. I took off my heels and placed them, softly on the rug. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around, to pretend I never came home. But the strategist in me, the woman who ran a multi-million-dollar art business, took over. You must know. I moved through the living room, past the untouched kitchen, and towards the staircase. Each step was unnaturally loud on the polished wood. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a terrifying certainty. As I reached the landing, the sound finally reached me. A low, muffled laugh, followed by David's voice, a tone I had never heard him use. Relaxed, intimate, utterly foreign. It was coming from the master bedroom. I didn't pause. I didn't breathe. I simply reached for the polished brass handle of the bedroom door. My hand felt numb, disconnected from my brain, yet perfectly steady. I didn't push it open slowly for dramatic effect. I swung it wide, hard enough for the latch to click against the frame. The light spilling into the hallway was blinding, illuminating the wreckage of my life. They were there, not hiding, not struggling to put clothes back on, but tangled together in the crisp white sheets of our marital bed. David's eyes, usually so warm and focused on me, snapped up in pure, naked terror. Brenda's face, usually so composed and friendly across the fence, was contorted in a grotesque mask of shock and shame. The air was thick with their shared guilt, the visual representation of every single little lie, every late night, every nervous glance over the past few months. It wasn't just the physical sight that broke me. It was the realization that this beautiful, safe world I had built was nothing but a flimsy stage set, and they had been rehearsing their destructive little play right under my nose. A primal scream built in my chest, a volcanic urge to destroy everything around me, the silk pillows, the expensive sheets, their smug, lying faces. But the second I saw David lurch forward, attempting to cover himself and speak, something colder than ice flooded my veins. Screaming would only give them the power of reaction. Tears would make me the victim. I decided right then I wouldn't be either. I would be the judge, and the executioner, and the owner of the narrative. I didn't utter a word. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out my phone, and clicked the camera app. The small red light blinked, signaling that I was recording. I held the phone steady, moving it slowly across the scene. The scattered clothes, the wine glasses on the nightstand, 2 used, the horrifying image of them frozen in their private hell. I kept the camera fixed on their faces, capturing their panic, their immediate, undeniable guilt. David finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Wait, Sarah. It's not what it looks like. Please just..." I cut him off, not with my voice, but with a deliberate, cold action. I kept the phone recording, and with my free hand, I slowly reached for the handle and pulled the door shut, locking it from the outside with a decisive click of the deadbolt. I leaned my weight against the solid wood, trapping them inside our shame. They could scream, they could beg, but they couldn't leave. Not yet. I walked 3 steps down the hallway, found a small antique chair, and sat down heavily. The migraine suddenly vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The recording was secure. The immediate shock was processed. Now, it was time for strategy. David was trapped, but Brenda had a husband, A man who worked tirelessly in Houston building a life with a woman who was currently locked in my bedroom. I dialed the number, my fingers moving without hesitation. Mark answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful, oblivious. Mark, I am terribly sorry for calling you during your workday in Houston, but I need you to come home to Dallas right now, I said, my voice steady, professional, devoid of any tremor of emotion. Do not stop for anything. Do not call Brenda. Just drive. Something truly catastrophic has happened, and it involves your wife and my husband. I have definitive proof, and I promise you, you will want to see it with your own eyes. I gave him no room for questions, no comfort, just the sharp, clean edge of truth. The trap was set. Now, I just waited for the final audience to arrive. The game had begun. The light was a blinding weapon, stabbing behind my eyes with every beat of my pulse. I had spent 20 minutes trying to focus on the merger documents, watching the words swim on the page before finally admitting defeat. I need to go home, Sarah, I told my assistant, rubbing my temples. It's a catastrophic migraine. Tell Mr. Harrison I'll review the final projections first thing tomorrow. It was a lie, of course. Not the headache. That was real. But the cause. It wasn't stress from work. It was the slow, insidious rot of intuition that had been whispering in my ear for months. I needed silence, ice, and darkness. That debilitating ache, that weakness, was the only reason the universe allowed me to walk into the worst moment of my life. I drove the short distance from the financial district back to our quiet, tree-lined suburb. When I pulled into the drive, the first anomaly hit me like a physical blow. Mark's black sedan was parked squarely in the middle of the two-car garage. He had told me he was flying to Chicago for an emergency client consultation. His meeting was supposed to last until midnight. A sharp, cold pinprick of dread punctured the heat of my migraine. I parked my own car and used my silent key code to enter the house through the kitchen door. The air inside felt heavy, thick, and unnaturally still. Our house was rarely silent. Usually, there was the low hum of the television, the distant sound of the pool filter, or the melodic chime of the grandfather clock. Now, only the relentless throbbing behind my eyes filled the void. And then I smelled it. It wasn't my favorite jasmine or the faint, musky scent of Mark's cologne. It was a perfume I recognized, but one that didn't belong to me. Tropical, cloying, aggressively feminine. It was Brenda's signature scent, the one she wore to our book club meetings, the one I had complimented her on just last week as we planned the neighborhood charity gala. My feet moved without conscious direction, pulling me up the winding staircase. Every step was deliberate, silent. I was no longer a woman crippled by pain. I was a hunter moving through high grass. The heavy Persian runner muffled the sound of my approach, but the silence of the house amplified the furious drumming of my own heart. I stopped outside the master suite. The door was not latched, resting barely an inch ajar. A key, low, muffled noise was emanating from within. A sound that was neither dialogue nor music, but something primal, something utterly shameful. I gripped the doorknob, my knuckles white, the metal surprisingly hot under my touch. I didn't pause. I didn't breathe. I simply pushed. The world shattered, but only for a fraction of a second. The scene was brutally intimate, a violation of everything sacred, bathed in the soft, diffused light filtering through the sheer curtains. There, they were, Mark, my husband of 15 years, and Brenda, my confidant, my neighbor, the woman whose children I babysat. They weren't whispering sweet nothings. They were tangled together in a shocking tableau of deceit on the king-sized bed we shared. The pain in my head vanished, replaced by an absolute, terrifying clarity. It was worse than anger. It was a cold, pure distillation of betrayal. I did not scream. I did not drop the antique vase on the bedside table. I did, not collapse in tears. The reaction I had always expected, the theatrical display of heartbreak, never materialized. Instead, the high-level executive training kicked in. Screaming is noise. Noise complicates the evidence. My hand dove into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. My thumb moved with professional speed, unlocking the screen, switching to video, ensuring the flash was off. I held the device steady, my arm an unmoving tripod, and began to film. I captured every wretched detail. Their faces, contorted in surprise and fear, as they finally registered my presence, a ghost standing in the doorway. The cheap, telltale grin of guilt freezing on Brenda's face as she tried to cover herself with my duvet. The pathetic, wide-eyed plea for silence in Mark's eyes. I filmed their scrambling, their attempts to retrieve their clothes scattered on the floor next to my mahogany dresser. I allowed the camera to linger just long enough to capture the final, undeniable proof. Then, just as Mark finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic attempt at, "Wait, honey, it's not what it looks like." I lowered the phone, the video still recording in my hand. I took one last, long look at the destruction they had wrought, not out of sadness, but out of forensic curiosity. I closed the door, gently, precisely. The soft click of the latch turning into the lock mechanism was the sound of a closing casket. They were trapped inside the room with their shame. The master suite, previously my sanctuary, was now a cage. I walked down the stairs, retrieved my keys, and walked straight out to the patio, the expensive scent of Brenda's perfume clinging to my clothes. It was then, standing by the pool, the sunlight warm on my face contrasting with the Arctic cold in my veins, that I made the call. "Dallas, you need to drive to Dallas right now," I said, my voice steady, professional, devoid of any tremor of emotion. "Do not stop for anything. Do not call Brenda. Just drive. Something truly catastrophic has happened, and it involves your wife and my husband. I have definitive proof, and I promise you, you will want to see it with your own eyes." I gave him no room for questions, no comfort, just the sharp, clean edge of truth. I didn't need to tell him what happened. The tone of my voice was sufficient. I had secured the visual evidence, contained the culprits, and summoned the final witness. The trap was set. Now I just waited for the final audience to arrive. The game had begun, and I intended to win every single hand. The meeting was supposed to last until 5. I was already halfway down the highway, heading toward the city center, when the pounding started behind my eyes. It wasn't just a headache, it was a physical impossibility to focus. I pulled over, called my assistant, and fabricated a sudden, terrible flu. The truth was, my body was giving me an out, a perfectly logical reason to deviate from the routine. I truly needed to retrieve my prescription bottle, which held the painkillers I couldn't live without, and I needed to do it immediately. Driving back felt profoundly wrong. The anxiety wasn't just physical discomfort. It was a deep, primal thrumming in my chest. When I pulled into the driveway, his truck was parked there. My heart didn't skip a beat. It dropped, heavy and cold, into my stomach. He was supposedly at the warehouse across town, overseeing a massive delivery. I turned off the engine and sat in the stifling silence of the early afternoon, listening only to the distant hum of the neighbor's air conditioner. I grabbed my key, moving like an automaton, my steps unnaturally silent on the flagstone path. The house was too still. It held a suffocating weight that screamed of secrecy. As I stepped through the mudroom, the air hit me, a synthetic, aggressive sweetness overlaying a sharp, masculine musk. It was not my perfume. It was not my husband's cologne. It was hers. Clara's cheap floral disaster, the one she always wore when she popped over for coffee. I didn't announce myself. I didn't fumble with the keys or shout a greeting. I just moved. Up the stairs, each step a dull thud against the plush carpet, muffled by the rising pressure in my ears. The master bedroom door was cracked open, just enough to let the faint sounds of low, guttural laughter escape. A laughter that wasn't mine. A laughter that spoke of intimacy, proximity, and utter disregard. I pushed the door inward, gently, so the hinge wouldn't squeak. And there it was. The scene that had been playing in my nightmares for months, now real, concrete, devastatingly mundane. They were tangled in the expensive sheets I had painstakingly chosen, on the custom-made bed where we had pledged loyalty and planned our entire future. The sight wasn't a firework explosion of pain. It was a deep, bone-chilling freeze. The air turned crystalline, every detail sharp and unforgiving. His eyes, usually so sharp and focused on business matters, were glazed over with a cheap, vacant pleasure. And Clara, my sweet, smiling neighbor, was looking up at me, not with shame, but with a flicker of startled, childish annoyance, like a toddler caught with a stolen cookie. The world went silent, but my mind accelerated. There was no pain, no shock, just a cold, analytical clarity that seized control. My body absolutely refused to permit the weakness of screaming or tears. That would have given them power, a reaction to manage, a script they could follow. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and switched the camera to video mode. Steady, unflinching. I filmed the entire scene, the expressions of sheer panic now spreading across their faces, the details of the room, the state of the bed, the specific patterns on Clara's dress tossed carelessly on the floor. It was evidence, not emotion. They scrambled, fumbling for covers, stammering denials that sounded like gibberish. "Sarah, wait, don't be ridiculous, it was just..." My husband tried to shout, but the words withered in his throat under the glare of my lens. I stepped back, never breaking eye contact, giving them no relief, and quietly pulled the heavy oak bedroom door shut. The loud, decisive click of the yaw, deadbolt locking, was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. I had contained the biological hazard. I leaned against the cool wood of the locked door, my breath coming in shallow, precise puffs. My husband. My ex-husband. I corrected mentally. The transition already complete. Started banging violently on the other side, his voice thick with terror and rage. "Open the door, Sarah. This isn't what it looks like. Don't do this." But I was already on the phone, dialing the number of Mark, Clara's unsuspecting husband. The initial call, just moments before I entered the house, had been vague. A cryptic summons designed purely to get him moving. This call was the final piece of the trap, the confirmation of the horror I had just witnessed. "Mark?" I whispered, keeping my voice low and steady so he wouldn't hear the chaos echoing behind the door. "I'm home. They are locked in the master bedroom. Do not call the police. Do not call them. Lawyer yet. Just drive here, park down the street at the corner of Elm, and meet me at the back patio in exactly 10 minutes. You need to see this with your own eyes before you do anything else." I hung up, my hand vibrating slightly, not from fear, but from the immense, shocking power of finally holding all the reins. The initial numbness was giving way to a fierce, strategic determination. They thought they had destroyed my life with a few minutes of cheap thrill. They were wrong. They had only handed me the weapon to dismantle theirs. The show was about to begin. I had left the office that afternoon feeling the first sharp stabs of a migraine behind my right eye. I rarely got them, but when I did, they were crippling. I'd sent a quick text to Mark saying I was heading home to take my specific medication and sleep it off. He was usually busy with meetings downtown, so I expected silence until late evening. This, I realize now, was the perfect camouflage for my unexpected return. Driving back to our perfectly manicured home in Evanston, all I wanted was the dark, cool silence of our bedroom. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his black SUV. It was parked carelessly, slightly angled toward the perennial flower bed. A small detail, but Mark was meticulous about parking. Odd, I thought, rubbing my temple. Maybe he'd forgotten something too, rushed back, and left again. The silence that greeted me when I unlocked the front door wasn't the usual comfortable emptiness of a house without its inhabitants. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. A silence that felt stolen. I kicked off my heels in the foyer, my head pounding, and paused. The air was thick, heavy with a cloying sweetness that was definitely not my usual cedar and sandalwood blend. It was gardenia and cheap musk, the signature scent of our neighbor Jessica. My migraine vanished instantly, replaced by a cold metallic clarity that was terrifyingly potent. My heart rate didn't spike. It plummeted, settling into a slow, deliberate drumbeat of dread. My body was preparing for war. I didn't call out. I didn't announce my presence. I moved through the living room, past the framed photographs of our smiling faces, a ghost gliding through a memory that was already decomposing. The carpet muffled my approach as I started up the stairs, but the third step always creaked subtly under pressure. I froze, listened, and continued. I noticed the door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar. I stopped outside the threshold. The sounds that finally reached me weren't loud, just low, rhythmic murmurs and the muffled shifting of fabric. The sight was even worse than any horrific mental image I had conjured on the drive home. They were on my bed. Jessica's bright pink summer dress was crumpled on the mahogany chest of drawers, a vulgar splash of color against the dark wood. Mark was facing the door, and his eyes, when they met mine, were wide, with a horrifying mix of panic and utter defeat. He didn't even have time to cover himself. It wasn't the nudity or the physical act that cracked me. It was the casual cruelty of it all. They looked bored, almost, like two children caught stealing cookies they didn't even want. The backdrop was our life. The clock tower we bought in Venice, the wedding picture still on the bedside table. I did not scream. I did not drop my bag. I felt nothing except the distant surgical need for proof. My training as a project manager kicked in. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and switched the camera to video mode. My hands were perfectly steady. "Don't move," I said, my voice a flat monotone that sounded alien even to my own ears. Mark tried to scramble for the sheet, his betrayal momentarily replaced by pure animal terror. I said, "Don't move," I repeated, louder this time, my phone recording the horror show. I panned slowly, deliberately, capturing Mark's face, Jessica's blotchy, horrified expression, and the entire setting. Every detail was cataloged, notarized by the cold lens of my phone. When I finished the recording, which took maybe 20 seconds but felt like an eternity, I stepped back silently, closing the door firmly behind me. I didn't lock it yet. I wanted them to stew, trapped by their shame but with the constant grinding fear that I might walk back in at any moment. I walked back down to the kitchen, the adrenaline pulsing like liquid nitrogen through my veins. I retrieved my phone and dialed the number of the person I had just called minutes ago. David, Jessica's husband. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with confusion, still reeling from my cryptic instruction to meet me behind the house. I had given him enough time to get home from his law office, but not enough time to cool down. "David, forget the patio," I commanded, pouring myself a glass of water, the ice clinking loudly against the heavy glass, the only sound in the dead house. "I need you to come inside right now. Use the spare key under the gnome. Come straight to the kitchen. And bring your heaviest briefcase. We have paperwork to discuss, and you need to look like you mean business. Do not make a sound until you are standing right next to me." "What in God's name is happening, Sarah? Did Mark hurt you?" he whispered, raw fear dripping from every syllable. "What's happening, David, is that we are about to present our spouses with an itemized invoice for their treachery," I replied, the ice water doing nothing to cool the fire in my chest. "Hurry, the clock is ticking, and I want them to be hungry when they finally eat their humble pie." I placed the phone down, grabbed the spare set of keys, and walked back upstairs. This time, I didn't hesitate. I slid the key into the master bedroom lock and turned it sharply. Click. They were officially imprisoned. The shock had passed. The alliance was formed. Now, the execution began. It wasn't a sudden, blinding revelation wrapped in fireworks and drama. It was the slow, chilling realization that my meticulous life was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. The collapse started not with a scream, but with the simple, urgent realization that I had forgotten the customized financial analysis report. I was halfway to the downtown law firm, fighting midday traffic, when panic seized me. That report, which I had spent the entire night perfecting, was sitting right next to my laptop charger at home. I absolutely had to have it for the 11:30 a.m. meeting. I spun the car around. He was supposedly tied up in a marathon leadership conference in the city, and the house in Greenwich would be blessedly quiet. It was 11:15 a.m. Pulling into the drive, the first dissonance struck me. His black Audi was parked slightly crookedly in the garage bay. Not his usual surgical precision. A tiny cold knot formed low in my stomach. I told myself he must have had to rush out for something, maybe an emergency dentist appointment. I pushed the side door open quietly. The house was silent. Too silent. The hum of the smart thermostat and the gentle tick of the grandfather clock seemed muted, smothered by a heavy, unnatural stillness. And then, the scent. It wasn't his sophisticated sandalwood cologne. It was something sweet, aggressively floral and cheap. A heavy musk I recognized instantly. Sarah, our neighbor, the one I had just shared a glass of iced tea with the day before, comparing notes on organic fertilizer. My legs became automatons, carrying me up the curved oak staircase. I could hear nothing but the frantic, shallow rhythm of my own breath. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, back, to preserve the blissful, if fragile, ignorance of the last 11 years. But the disciplined professional in me, the one who handles seven-figure litigation, refused to retreat without evidence. Proof is power. I reached the landing. The master bedroom door, which we habitually left ajar, was firmly closed. My hand trembled slightly, hovering over the cold brass knob. This was the point of no return. Everything beautiful, every shared dream, every financial plan, hinged on this moment. I turned the handle and pushed the door inward. The air hit me, thick, suffocating, saturated with that sickening floral perfume and the raw, electric humidity of illicit passion. They were there, not whispering secrets or sharing a quick, regrettable kiss. They were tangled on our Egyptian cotton sheets, a grotesque, sickening tableau. His face, usually composed and authoritative, snapped toward me, eyes wide with a terror that instantly evaporated any lingering love I might have held. Sarah's head lifted from his shoulder, and the look she gave me wasn't guilt. It was the sheer, naked shame of being caught mid-theft. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my expensive leather briefcase. I made a sound that wasn't human, a quiet, controlled gasp, the sound of an internal dam breaking cleanly, without splash or fuss. My legal training surged forward, seizing control of my body. Emotional outburst equals loss of leverage. My hands moved with surgical precision. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, unlocked the camera app, and hit record. I held the phone steady, zooming slightly to capture the horror in his face, the way her hand still rested awkwardly on his chest, the clothes tossed carelessly onto the Persian rug. The silence stretched, deafening. They were paralyzed, less by the shame of the act and more by the absolute, terrifying coldness of my reaction. "Don't move," I stated, my voice a low, dangerous monotone that sounded alien even to my own ears. "Don't say a word. I need the documentation to be crystal clear." I filmed them for 60 seconds, a minute that felt like an eternity carved out of granite. I captured the state of the room, the physical proof, and their utter inability to move or speak. When I finally lowered the phone, I didn't wait for their clumsy excuses. I stepped back, pulling the heavy door shut with a deliberate, echoing thud. I needed to secure my evidence and my physical advantage. The spare key to the master suite was kept in the safe, hidden behind the large landscape painting in the study. I retrieved it, my hands steady now, fueled by a chilling, pure rage. I walked back up the stairs, slid the key into the heavy lock, and turned it sharply. Click. They were officially imprisoned. The shock had passed. The operational phase had begun. I didn't want the first conversation to be with him. The Yao, biggest piece of leverage, was external. I walked back downstairs to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and pulled up a contact I hadn't used in months. Mark, Sarah's devoted, unsuspecting husband. I needed an ally, and Mark was the other victim of this ugly arrangement. "Mark," I began, my voice dry and devoid of any warmth, the remnants of my love for my husband professionally discarded. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have some urgent news regarding Sarah. I have photographic and video evidence here in my home in Stamford. I think it's time we discussed our shared problem and how we intend to handle the ensuing legal mess." The alliance was forged in mutual betrayal, cold, efficient, and absolutely necessary. I had my proof, I had my leverage, and now I had my co-conspirator. The clock was ticking, and I wanted them to be hungry when they finally ate their humble pie. The alliance was forged in mutual betrayal, cold, efficient, and absolutely necessary. I had my proof, I had my leverage, and now I had my co-conspirator. The clock was ticking, and I wanted them to be hungry when they finally ate their humble pie. But to understand the chilling calculation behind that phone call, you have to rewind just 3 hours, back to the moment my meticulously constructed reality shattered into 1,000 worthless pieces on the polished hardwood floor of our Stamford home. I remember staring at the clock on the dashboard, cursing the mid-morning traffic crawling along the I-95. I was already 15 minutes behind schedule for the most critical client meeting of the quarter, and suddenly, a cold, sharp panic sliced through my focus. The merger documentation, the confidential binder stamped eyes only, was still sitting on my home office desk. I had been so focused on my presentation slides that I had left the physical proof behind. There was no choice. I had to turn the car around. My career demanded I retrieve that folder. It was strange. The familiar drive back felt coated in a thick, sticky silence. As I pulled into the driveway, the first genuine prickle of unease struck me. Mark's black Lexus was parked awkwardly in the garage spot, almost touching the wall. He was supposed to be downtown, leading a team briefing. I told myself he must have forgotten something too. Maybe his wallet, or maybe he'd been called home due to a sudden, technical issue. Excuses. My mind, trained for efficiency, was already building flimsy defenses. I entered through the laundry room, avoiding the noisy front door. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful silence of an empty house, but the heavy, muffled silence of something deliberately suppressed. I dropped my briefcase by the sink and inhaled. That was when I smelled it. A perfume. It wasn't my subtle, expensive blend of jasmine and sandalwood. This was cheap, aggressively floral, almost sickeningly sweet. It was Sarah's perfume. Sarah, our neighbor, the woman who borrowed my sugar and shared gardening tips over coffee on my deck. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe, as if the oxygen had been replaced by a slow, creeping poison. I moved silently, instinctively. I didn't call out his name. I didn't want to give him a warning. I climbed the stairs, each tread screaming under my weight, though I moved with the lightness of a cat. The deeper I went into the house, the stronger the scent became, mingling now with the distinct metallic smell of human sweat and something else, something shameful and primal. The master bedroom door was not closed properly. It was slightly ajar, casting a thin, vertical slice of shadow across the plush carpet. I stopped just outside, my heart not pounding, but sinking like a stone into a deep, icy well. I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of the mattress springs protesting, a sound that, until that moment, I had only associated with intimacy and love, but which now sounded like the execution of my soul. I pushed the door open, slowly, just enough to see. The shock wasn't a scream. It was a profound, seismic shift in reality. It wasn't just the sight of them tangled in the sheets, my sheets, the ones I had bought in Rome on our anniversary trip. It was the casual, effortless debasement of everything we had built. There was Mark, my husband, the man who swore vows before God and family, his eyes closed in a moment of selfish indulgence. And there was Sarah, her expression one of smug, almost bored familiarity. In that instant, I did not recognize the man I married, and the woman beside him was no longer a friend, but a cockroach I needed to exterminate. I should have screamed. I should have thrown a lamp. I should have crumpled to the floor and wept until I dehydrated. But I did none of those things. The betrayal was so immense, so clinical, that it froze the part of my brain responsible for raw emotion. I became pure strategy. My hands, steady as a surgeon's, reached into my purse. I pulled out my phone, switched off the ringer, and activated the camera. I did not need to zoom. I filmed them. I filmed the messy sheets, the clothes strewn on the floor, the faces of the two people destroying my life. I captured the irrefutable evidence, the timestamp clearly visible, the silence of the room, broken only by the mechanical hum of the camera and their muffled breathing. This wasn't revenge. This was securing the future. This was business. When the video was exactly 60 seconds long, establishing the context, the faces, and the location, I stopped recording. I backed out of the room, my steps silent, predatory. They hadn't heard me. They were too lost in their pathetic bubble of lust. I closed the door gently, silently. Then, with a decisive click, I slid the security latch across the frame, locking them inside my bedroom. They were trapped, marooned on the island of their deceit. I walked down the stairs, retrieved the confidential file I'd forgotten, and then settled into the leather chair in my home office. I took 3 deep breaths, the scent of Sarah's cheap perfume still clinging to the air, but now it felt less like poison and more like fuel. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records for Sarah's address. David. Her husband. A kind, unassuming man who coached Little League and always shoveled my sidewalk when it snowed. I had the proof, and they were physically contained. My next move had to be surgical. I didn't want chaos. I wanted organized destruction. If I confronted them alone, they would invent a story, minimize the damage. But if David and I moved together, the shockwave would be absolute. I picked up the phone. My voice, when I spoke, was level, devoid of tremor, colder than the ice that coated the New England coast in January. I remember hearing the confusion in David's voice when he answered, followed by the polite, tentative query. I cut him off instantly. "David," I stated, my eyes fixed on the locked door 2 floors above me. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have some urgent news regarding Sarah. I have photographic and video evidence here in my home in Stamford. I think it's time we discussed our shared problem and how we intend to handle the ensuing legal mess." The deal was struck. The game had officially begun, and they didn't even know they were playing. They were still basking in the glow of their pathetic afternoon romp, locked in my bedroom, while outside, their lives were being meticulously dismantled, piece by strategic piece. It wasn't a forgotten document, a missed appointment, or a need for my house keys that brought me back to our quiet street in Greenwich that afternoon. It was a white-hot, blinding spike of pain behind my eyes, a migraine so severe it demanded immediate darkness and silence. I told my assistant I was done for the day, left the bustling city center of Manhattan, and sped home, praying the drive would be quick. The cruelest irony of all is that if I had been perfectly healthy, if I had finished that last conference call, I would have arrived home to an empty, peaceful house, and this secret, corrosive poison would have continued to thrive beneath the surface of our life. As I pulled into the driveway, the pain momentarily faded, replaced by a cold, immediate spike of cognitive dissonance. Mark's Lexus, which he swore he needed for a critical client meeting downtown that would run late, was parked haphazardly near the garage door. A fleeting thought. Maybe he rushed back for his presentation notes. But the house was unnervingly silent, too silent for a mid-afternoon rush. I unlocked the front door and, stepped into the foyer. The air was thick, heavy, like breathing through wet linen. And then, the smell hit me. It wasn't the sophisticated scent of Mark's usual cologne. It was a cheap saccharine floral, aggressively sweet, Sarah's signature scent, the one she always wore at book club, fighting violently with the faint metallic scent of tension that now saturated the air of my perfect home. My heart didn't race. It seemed to freeze entirely. The migraine vanished, replaced by an awful, heavy clarity. Every step on the polished oak staircase was a deafening drumbeat, announcing my arrival. I held my breath, partly because I suddenly didn't want to inhale the truth, and partly because I knew, absolutely, profoundly, that the reality I was about to confront would shatter the floor beneath me. The door to our master suite, the room we had meticulously designed together, was slightly ajar. I stopped 3 feet away. The world narrowed to that 10-inch gap, a dark slit revealing the end of my marriage. I didn't need to push the door open fully to see it. It wasn't the explicit, vulgar act that crushed me in that instant. It was the casual, careless intimacy of the betrayal. They were sprawled across our imported Italian linens, a tangle of limbs and cheap desire. Mark looked like a cheap imitation of the man I loved, his usually impeccable suit shirt half unbuttoned, his tie discarded like garbage, his face flushed, not with passion, but with the smug, pathetic thrill of the forbidden. And Sarah. She saw me first. The moment our eyes locked, the sound of her breath hitched, a tiny, ragged sound of pure animal terror. The blood drained instantly from her face, leaving her eyes wide and black against the shocking white of her skin. Mark followed her gaze, turning his head slowly, like a malfunctioning robot. When he finally registered my presence, standing utterly still, my briefcase still, clutched in my hand, the color drained from his face too. The scream that wanted to tear itself from my lungs died somewhere deep in my chest. I made no sound. I didn't weep. I didn't rage. My hand moved with the swift, cold efficiency of a surgeon. I reached for my phone, unlocked the screen, and switched the camera to video mode. The footage was rolling before either of them could fully process what was happening. I stood there, rooted to the spot, documenting the silence, the sheer panic, the visual proof of their intertwined limbs on the bed we had shared for 10 years. My eyes, I knew, were cold and flat, reflecting back only the image of their immediate, sickening humiliation. Mark started scrambling for the sheet, stammering my name, a broken, useless sound. Sarah just covered her face, dissolving into silent, shaking shame. I took 3 deliberate steps back, retreating from the doorway, never breaking eye contact with Mark. I had the evidence. The documentation was pristine. My work here at this stage was done. I reached out and pulled the heavy oak door shut, slowly, deliberately. The soft, decisive click of the heavy latch engaging sounded like a gavel striking wood. They were trapped. They were not my partners anymore. They were my exhibits. I walked downstairs, my hands perfectly steady, the residual pain of the migraine completely obliterated by the surge of adrenaline and calculated fury. I walked straight to the home office, uploaded the video instantly to a secure cloud drive, and then, without hesitation, I dialed the only person who shared my new reality. David. I whispered into the phone, my voice sharp and crystalline. The sound was foreign, belonging to a woman I had just become. It's done. I have everything. They are currently locked in the master bedroom. I gave them no explanation, no chance to lie. Get your affairs in order. We execute the plan at dawn. We will need to be meticulous, silent, and absolutely brutal. The deal was struck. The game had officially begun, and they didn't even know they were playing. They were still locked in my bedroom, basking in the glow of their pathetic afternoon romp, while outside, their lives were being meticulously dismantled, piece by strategic piece. They thought they had shared a secret. They had only shared a cell. I had left the downtown office around 2 o'clock, convinced I needed to push through the brutal pace of the late week schedule. I pride myself on resilience, on never letting a single email go unanswered or a deadline slip. But the dull, persistent throb behind my eyes quickly escalated into a blinding, incapacitating migraine. The fluorescent lights of the accounting floor suddenly felt like physical assaults, sharp shards piercing my skull. I called my assistant, canceling the afternoon meetings with the vague excuse of a family emergency, and told her I was heading straight back to the quiet sanctuary of our home in Preston Hollow. I needed the darkness, the silence, and the heavy-duty prescription meds waiting in the bathroom cabinet. That pain, that unwanted, agonizing pressure in my head, was the only reason I walked through that door 4 hours early. That migraine saved me from living a lie for 1 day longer. I pulled the Lexus into the driveway, noticing immediately that David's black SUV was parked slightly crookedly, almost jammed against the Japanese maple. Odd. He was supposed to be at a conference downtown until 6, finalizing the merger details that were the foundation of his career. My first thought was innocent. Maybe he'd forgotten his laptop charger and rushed home quickly. I entered the security code, the heavy oak door swinging inward with a familiar sigh. The silence hit me first. A dense, unnatural stillness that swallowed the usual afternoon. Sounds of the neighborhood. No TV, no music, no dog barking. Then came the smell. It wasn't the fresh linen scent I used religiously. It was heavy, overtly floral, cloyingly sweet. It was Chloe's perfume, that sickeningly recognizable scent she always oversprayed. My heart didn't just drop. It seized, freezing the blood in my veins. The migraine was instantly forgotten, replaced by a cold, sharp, exhilarating clarity. I moved silently, already in a tactical mode I didn't know. I possessed. I took my phone out, not to call him, not to scream, but to switch it to airplane mode and immediately start the video recording function. I ascended the stairs, each step muffled by the expensive runner, thankful for the silent architecture of our meticulously designed, yet ultimately betrayal-proof, home. The master bedroom door was not closed. It was ajar, just a hairline crack. a careless sliver of light and sound escaping into the darkness of the hallway. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. The woman who had been David's wife for 15 years was dead. A new entity, focused only on meticulous execution, had taken her place. I placed my hand on the cool metal handle and pushed the door slowly, smoothly, allowing the silence of the hallway to bleed into the scene inside. And there they were, the tableau of my shattered life, bathed in the soft, diffused afternoon light streaming through the sheer curtains. David, my husband, the man who promised forever, entangled with Chloe, my supposed confidant. The neighbor whose children played in our yard just yesterday. They were right there, not hidden, not discreet, but exposed on the very bed where I slept every night. The sight didn't trigger tears or a scream. It triggered a deep, visceral rage that manifested not as chaos, but as pure, surgical focus. I kept the phone steady, the red recording dot confirming the evidence was being captured. I didn't step fully into the room to announce my presence. I stood in the doorway, a ghost observing the absolute filth of their deceit. They hadn't heard me. They were too far gone, too consumed by their pathetic fantasy of stolen minutes. I let the silence stretch for 5 full seconds, capturing the undeniable truth, the sickening familiarity of their interaction, the look on David's face, a mixture of hurried pleasure and guilt, and Chloe's eyes, closed in smug satisfaction. Then, I pulled the door shut with the same slow, deliberate movement. Click. The sound was soft, definitive, a period at the end of their affair's timeline. I didn't lock it yet. I needed them to think they were still insulated, still safe, still entitled to their cheap pleasure. I needed time to secure the next phase of the operation. I retreated down the hallway, the phone still recording the muffled sounds of my quiet departure, just in case they later tried to argue about timing or consent. I walked straight to the home office, closing that door softly behind me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, focused on the mission parameters. I leaned against the heavy mahogany desk, the cool wood grounding me. I needed an accomplice, someone who would understand the depth of this violation, someone whose life was also being systematically destroyed. The first call wasn't to my lawyer or my mother. It was to Mark, Chloe's husband. He was probably still oblivious at the investment firm downtown, meticulously building the perfect life Chloe was dismantling. I took a deep breath, the phantom scent of her cheap perfume still clinging to the cuff of my silk blouse. I waited for him to answer, the familiar, professional greeting echoing in the phone. "Mark," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, a flat line of tactical necessity. "I apologize for interrupting your day, but you need to come home immediately. No, don't call Chloe, don't alert her. Just drive. I have something crucial you need to see, something about her and David. Meet me at the Starbucks outside your firm now. I will explain everything in person. And Mark," I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper, ensuring the gravity of the moment was transmitted through the fiber optic line. "You need to prepare yourself. This is going to hurt." I hung up before he could process the severity, before he could ask a single, useless question. The alliance was formed. The countdown had begun. They were still wrapped in their deception, but outside that bedroom, the world was already mobilizing to deliver justice. The throbbing started behind my left eye around lunchtime. It wasn't just a headache. It was the kind of blinding migraine that made the fluorescent office lights feel like daggers stabbing directly into my brainstem. I tried to push through, convinced I could manage the final edits before the deadline, but after nearly collapsing while fetching coffee, I admitted defeat. I texted my assistant, claiming a sudden family emergency, and didn't bother calling David. He was supposedly tied up in a crucial client meeting across town in downtown Phoenix until at least 7 p.m. The thought of my cool, dark bedroom and the absolute silence of our Scottsdale home was the only thing pulling me through the searing pain. I pulled into the driveway just after 3:30 p.m., the familiar manicured landscaping offering no comfort. The first sign that something was catastrophically wrong was subtle, a whisper of dread that froze the blood in my veins. David's Lexus, which should have been miles away in a downtown parking structure, was tucked neatly into its usual spot in the 3-car garage. My stomach clenched, the nausea of the migraine instantly replaced by a sharp, icy terror. I tried to rationalize. Maybe he forgot his briefcase. Maybe he had a sudden, urgent conference call. I dismissed the thoughts as quickly as they arrived. David would have called, texted, or at least left a note. This silence was wrong. I used my key, the grating sound of the lock turning a deafening noise in the unnatural stillness of the afternoon. I kicked off my heels by the mudroom, moving silently, instinctively knowing I needed stealth, not noise. The air inside felt heavy, thick, and strangely sweet. It was not David's familiar, woodsy aftershave. It was Chloe's perfume, that ridiculously distinctive blend of jasmine and vanilla that I'd smelled 1,000 times when she'd drop off cookies or borrow a garden tool. It was pervasive, clinging to the air like a poisonous gas. The pain was entirely gone, replaced by a crystalline, devastating clarity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the mausoleum silence of our life. I moved to the bottom of the oak staircase. Each step I took was a measured movement, a deliberate choice toward a truth I already knew but hadn't yet quantified. I didn't call his name. I didn't want to alert them, to give them a single second to clean up the wreckage. The sound of muffled laughter, quickly cut off, drifted down from the master suite. My breath hitched. I paused just outside the bedroom door. It was partially ajar. I pushed it open just enough to see, bracing myself for the sight, yet still completely unprepared for the reality. The world collapsed into a single, horrific tableau. David, my rock, the man whose hand I held every night for 10 years, was there. And beside him, tangled in the crisp white duvet I had chosen only last month, was Chloe, my neighbor, my friend. The woman who had just last week brought me a casserole when I had the flu. They were illuminated by the late afternoon sun streaming through the bay window. Their bodies intertwined, their expressions caught frozen in the sudden blast of light from the hallway. Their faces were not filled with passion or love. They were caught, panicked, cheap. The shock wasn't the nakedness. It was the familiarity, the commonness of the betrayal, the sheer brazen comfort they felt using my space for their filth. An animalistic scream tried to claw its way out of my throat, but I swallowed it whole, burying it deep beneath layers of ice. That scream belonged to the old me, the naive wife who believed home in happy endings. The new me, the strategist, took over. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and switched the camera to video mode. My hand was steady. I didn't rush. I walked fully into the room, holding the phone up, capturing the shame, the wide-eyed terror, the irrefutable evidence. I didn't say a word. Silence was my weapon. David scrambled for the sheet, his face rapidly cycling through fear, aggression, and then a desperate plea. Chloe merely covered her face, with her arms, a pathetic, cowardly gesture. I made sure to pan slowly, showing the familiar artwork on the wall, the custom initials embroidered on the pillowcases. Context matters. I needed proof that this was my bed, my house, my life they were demolishing. I needed to document the exact moment of their destruction. When I had enough footage, when the humiliation was perfectly archived, I stopped filming. I didn't drop the phone. I just looked at David, my expression utterly blank, devoid of pity or pain. The silence stretched, unbearable, punctuated only by their shallow, terrified breathing. "Get dressed," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, completely calm. "Both of you, and don't touch anything in this room. You are not leaving." I backed out, closing the heavy oak door with a decisive thud, effectively trapping them in their guilt. I didn't lock the door from the outside. That wasn't necessary yet. I needed them to think they still had a sliver of hope, a desperate chance to talk their way out of this. I went downstairs, sat on the pristine leather sofa in the living room, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The air still carried the scent of Chloe's jasmine, but underneath it, I could smell the metallic tang of impending war. David's business partner, Mark, was Chloe's husband. A good man, a decent man, oblivious, and currently thinking he was working late in a sterile office tower. The next step was obvious. I pulled up Mark's contact, my fingers moving without hesitation. This wasn't about revenge, it was about precision. I needed an ally for the ensuing confrontation, and Mark needed the truth delivered directly, from a source he could trust. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, and then he answered, his voice cheerful, professional. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, though the entire foundation of my life had just cracked open. "I need you to come to my house, immediately. Do not call Chloe. Do not call David. I will explain everything in person. And Mark," I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper, ensuring the gravity of the moment was transmitted through the fiber optic line. "You need to prepare yourself. This is going to hurt." I hung up before he could process the severity, before he could ask a single useless question. The alliance was formed. The countdown had begun. They were still wrapped in their deception, imprisoned, in my bedroom. But outside that door, the world was already mobilizing to deliver justice. My headache was cured. Now, the real work began. I was halfway to downtown Boston, maybe 40 minutes into my commute, already running through the agenda for the pivotal 2 p.m. board meeting, when the cold, sickening realization hit me. It wasn't intuition or a vague sense of unease. It was pure, panicked, professional failure. The original signed merger documents. The red folder was not in my briefcase. It was sitting precisely where I had left it, mocking me from the center of my home office desk. Turning the sleek SUV around was an act of frustration, not suspicion. I cursed my own distraction, irritated by the lost time. I imagined David was still deep in his own office schedule, focused on his late-day calls. The thought of him being anywhere else didn't even register as a possibility. Our life was a predictable, comfortable machine of shared trust and ambition. Pulling into the driveway of our meticulously kept colonial home, I noticed the first anomaly. Sarah's sedan. Our neighbor, Sarah, the woman who borrowed my sugar and watched my dog when we traveled, was parked slightly crookedly, tucked awkwardly against the curb. Why was Sarah here? I wondered if she'd dropped off a casserole or needed to borrow a tool. The house was silent. Too silent. I slipped my heels off in the mudroom, an ingrained habit of not wanting to disturb the tranquility, and the silence amplified, swallowing the usual gentle hum of the refrigerator. As I walked past the kitchen toward the stairs, a heavy, cloying scent assaulted me. Not the comforting, fresh aroma of our usual home scents, but a foreign, thick floral perfume. Sarah's signature scent. It was chemical and assertive, hanging in the air like a poorly veiled lie. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a dull, frantic rhythm that seemed to signal danger before my brain could process it. It wasn't fury yet. It was a cold, sickening certainty of premonition. I didn't rush. I walked slowly up the winding staircase, each polished wooden step a precise, inevitable drumbeat, leading to the point of no return. The air upstairs was warmer, heavier. I stopped outside the master bedroom door. It was closed. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. Hesitation was for those who still held hope. I simply turned the weighty brass handle and pushed the solid oak door inward. The sight hit me with the force of a physical blow, yet simultaneously froze every single muscle fiber in my body. David, my handsome, devoted husband, the man whose ring I wore as a symbol of permanent belonging, was tangled in a messy, sickening tableau with Sarah, right there, on the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets we had chosen together in Milan. The world didn't explode into noise. It compressed into a single, suffocating, silent frame. The look on David's face was the worst, not passion, but sheer, instantaneous surprise, followed instantly by a flash of cheap, caught guilt. Sarah's expression was pure, unadulterated shame, quickly masked by a desperate animal panic. They were scrambling, a confusing, horrific tangle of pale limbs and tangled fabric, trying futilely to cover the undeniable truth that was already burned onto my retina. The scream began deep in my chest, a primal, violent noise, desperate to escape and shatter the silence. But I swallowed it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My hands, astonishingly steady, reached immediately for my phone, pulling it from my pocket. The phone became a shield, a weapon, and an unblinking witness. I didn't engage them. I didn't speak a single word. I just raised the device, unlocked it with the swipe of my thumb, and started recording. The subtle click of the video activation was the loudest sound in the universe. "Get dressed," I finally said, my voice flat, hollow, devoid of any recognizable human emotion. It was a command, crisp and clean. I kept the lens pointed directly at them as they fumbled, covering their faces with hands and sheets. I filmed the state of the room, the clothes tossed carelessly, the visual evidence of the profound violation. I filmed the shame in their eyes. I needed documentation, indisputable proof, not a dramatic scene. I was not the hysterical wife. I was the executive securing her assets. I backed out slowly, never breaking the recording, never dropping my gaze, until I was outside the bedroom door. Once safely in the hallway, I reached for the spare key hidden above the doorframe. I inserted the key into the deadbolt and twisted it firmly. Click. They were trapped. Figuratively, yes, but also physically, while I secured my future. I didn't need to stay there and breathe the air they had fouled. I walked straight down to the quiet haven of my home office, the video now safely uploaded to a private, encrypted cloud folder. It was then, with my hands trembling slightly but my resolve absolute, that I called Michael, Sarah's husband. He was the only person in the world who could possibly understand the specific, suffocating violation I felt. I kept my voice low, pinging to a near whisper, ensuring the gravity of the moment was transmitted through the fiber optic line. "You need to prepare yourself. This is going to hurt." I hung up before he could process the severity, before he could ask a single useless question. The alliance was formed. The countdown had begun. They were still wrapped in their deception, imprisoned in my bedroom. But outside that door, the world was already mobilizing to deliver justice. My headache was cured. Now, the real work began. My headache was cured. Now, the real work began. I didn't need to listen to them whispering behind the locked door of my bedroom. Their voices were irrelevant noise compared to the symphony of evidence I was about to collect. I walked straight to his home office, a space he always guarded fiercely, and accessed his desktop computer. He thought he was smart, using encrypted apps on his phone, but he failed to clear the browsing history on his work laptop, the one connected to my high-speed internet. The sheer volume of their correspondence hit me first. Hundreds of messages spanning almost a year, meticulously planning dates, discussing logistics, and worst of all, mocking me. They had pet names for me: the bank, Old Faithful, and my personal favorite, the Warden. The realization wasn't a sudden burst of pain, but a deep, structural collapse of reality. It wasn't just physical. It was a deep, calculated partnership built on disrespect. They were planning a trip to the Caribbean, using the joint savings I had built. They debated how long it would, take for the Warden to figure it out. Reading those words, seeing their callous laughter crystallized in digital form, extinguished the last flicker of love. All that remained was cold, absolute clarity. I backed up every single file, every picture, every humiliating exchange onto a secure cloud drive, ensuring the evidence was ironclad and ready for the legal team. I checked the time. Enough time had passed for them to dress and attempt to formulate a defense. I unlocked the bedroom door and walked in. They were standing apart, looking rumpled and miserable, like children caught stealing cookies. Only the stakes were our entire life. Laura, the neighbor, avoided my eyes, staring at the expensive Persian rug. Mark, my husband, started immediately, the classic perpetrator script already loaded. "Honey, please let me explain," he pleaded, taking a hesitant step toward me. I raised my hand, stopping him dead. My voice was level, almost impossibly calm. "Don't come near me. You don't need to explain anything. The desktop in your office explained it all quite clearly. The Warden is highly informed." He flinched at the nickname, realizing I had seen the evidence. Laura started to cry, a high, thin sound that grated on my nerves. "It was just a mistake, Sarah," Mark insisted, his voice cracking. "A moment of weakness. It meant nothing. We can fix this." I pulled out my phone, activated the recorder, and placed it on the dresser between us. "Say that again, Mark. Say that it was just a mistake, and it meant nothing. I want to ensure I capture the full extent of your minimization." He stammered, his eyes darting to the flashing red light on my screen. He knew I was setting a trap, but he couldn't stop himself from trying to salvage his reputation. "It was only physical, Sarah. I still love you. It was just temporary madness." "Temporary madness that lasted a year and involved discussing how to spend my inheritance?" I countered, tilting my head. "Laura, did it feel like temporary madness when you were discussing your escape plans with my husband?" Laura just shook her head, tears streaming. They were cornered, exposed, and utterly unable to spin the narrative. I had everything I needed. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I simply executed the plan. "I have already contacted my attorney, Ms. Peterson. She is waiting for the transcript of this conversation," I informed Mark. "As of this moment, the locks on the house have been changed, and your access codes have been deleted. You are no longer welcome here. Your travel bag, containing essentials, is by the front door." His face went white. "You can't do this. This is my house." "This is our house, Mark, and legally I hold the stronger claim right now. Your options are simple. Leave peacefully now, or wait for the police that Ms. Peterson is prepared to call for. Trespassing." Laura looked at him, realizing her romantic hero was now just a pathetic, jobless man being evicted. Just as Mark was about to protest further, the doorbell rang. I smiled, a genuine, cold smile of satisfaction. "That will be David," I said, referring to Laura's husband, the one I had called hours earlier. "He's here to collect his wife and serve her with papers as well. Consider your alliance officially severed." They gathered their meager belongings, Marky grabbing the small duffel I'd packed, Laura clutching her purse, and shambled down the stairs. The sight of David waiting at the door, silent and radiating fury, was the final blow. Mark and Laura didn't look at each other, didn't hold hands, didn't offer a final defense. They simply walked out of my life, heads bowed in complete, irreversible humiliation, leaving the scent of cheap deceit behind them. I locked the heavy oak door and leaned against it, not in grief, but in relief. The silence of the house was immense and profound. It was finally, truly, mine again. The following months were a blur of legal paperwork, paint fumes, and passport stamps. I didn't just move on, I moved up. I sold off every piece of furniture that reminded me of us, opting for clean lines and vibrant colors that reflected the woman I was becoming. The house felt lighter, less suffocated by secrets. I traveled. I started a small consulting business that quickly flourished. I found that losing Mark didn't strip me of my identity. It revealed how much of myself I had been hiding for his comfort. One sunny afternoon, nearly 2 years after that dreadful day, I was having lunch with a potential client at a trendy outdoor cafe in downtown Austin. We were discussing expansion plans, laughing easily over iced tea. I paused mid-sentence, my eyes catching a figure walking down the street, worn down and carrying a stack of delivery boxes. It was Mark. He looked older, tired, and definitely less successful. He was wearing clothes that were too baggy, and the swagger that had defined him was completely gone, replaced by a nervous, hurried gait. He didn't see me, his gaze fixed anxiously on the pavement. My client followed my gaze. "Everything okay?" I turned back to him, a genuine smile curving my lips. I realized, with a startling clarity that felt like liberation, that my heart hadn't so much as fluttered. There was no pain, no hatred, no desire for retribution, just absolute total indifference. He was a stranger, a faded snapshot of a life I had wisely abandoned. "Perfectly fine," I replied, picking up my glass. "Just noticed someone who used to occupy a lot of space in my life. Funny how small some people look when you finally move out of their shadow." That is the power of rising above, my friends. Betrayal is a terrible fire, but you are not the wreckage. You are the phoenix. Do not let the actions of a small person define the vastness of your potential. Do not waste a single moment mourning a relationship that was built on lies. Your tears are too precious, and your time is infinitely valuable. You deserve a partner who respects your trust and a life built on solid truth. If you are hearing this right now, and you are trapped in a situation that feels too overwhelming to escape, remember this: you have the strength, you have the intellect, you have the right to claim your happiness and your future. Now tell me, where are you tuning in from right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I share these experiences not just for catharsis, but to arm you with the knowledge that you are never, ever alone in this fight. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and always choose yourself.